John loved his home. He had worked hard to buy it, and over the years, he had made many memories there. His house sat on a quiet street with a long driveway that led to his garage. He enjoyed the freedom of having his own space, free from unnecessary rules. That's why he had never thought much about the Homeowners Association, HOA. As far as he was concerned, they mostly handled things like landscaping and community events, nothing that really affected him. But one morning, everything changed. John was sipping his coffee on the porch when he heard loud noises coming from his driveway. It sounded like construction work, metal clanking, drills buzzing, and workers talking loudly. Confused, he put down his cup and stepped outside. To his shock, a group of workers was installing a large metal gate at the entrance of his driveway. It was tall, sturdy, and completely blocked his access. John's heart pounded as he walked up to them. "Excuse me," he said, trying to stay calm. "What's going on here?" One of the workers looked up. "We're installing a security gate," he replied casually, as if this was completely normal. John frowned. "A security gate? On my property? Who gave you permission?" The worker shrugged. "We're just following orders from the HOA." John's confusion turned into frustration. He hadn't received any notice about this. No letter, no phone call, nothing. He looked around, hoping to see someone from the HOA, but there was no one. Just these workers, drilling holes into his land. "This is my driveway," he said firmly. "You can't just install a gate here without my permission." The worker gave him an indifferent look. "Sir, you'll have to take it up with the HOA. We're just doing our job." John clenched his fists. He wanted to argue, but he knew it wasn't the workers' fault. They were just following instructions. But whose instructions? And why hadn't he been informed? Feeling his frustration grow, John marched back inside, grabbed his phone, and immediately called the HOA office. The phone rang several times before someone finally picked up. "Homeowners Association. This is Lisa speaking. How can I help you?" John took a deep breath. "Yeah, I need to know why there's a gate being installed on my property without my permission." There was a short pause before Lisa responded. "Oh, that would be the new security measure. The HOA board approved it last month. Didn't you get the notice?" John's grip tightened on the phone. "No, I did not get any notice. And even if I had, you can't just build something on my land without asking me first." Lisa hesitated. "Well, the decision was made to improve security for the neighborhood. It's part of our new access control policy." John couldn't believe what he was hearing. They were acting like his property was community space they could change whenever they wanted. "This is unacceptable," he said, his voice cold. "I want this gate removed immediately." Lisa sighed. "You'll have to speak with Mr. Whitman, the HOA president. He's the one who approved it." John didn't wait for more excuses. He hung up and grabbed his keys. If the HOA thought they could take over his property, they were about to learn a very expensive lesson. John drove straight to the HOA office, his frustration growing with every passing minute. He couldn't believe they had installed a gate on his property without his permission. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a violation of his rights. As he pulled into the small parking lot outside the HOA building, he took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Inside the office, a receptionist greeted him with a polite smile. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you?" "I need to speak with Mr. Whitman," John said firmly. "It's urgent." The receptionist glanced at her computer. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's about the gate the HOA put on my driveway without my permission," John said, crossing his arms. "I need answers now." The receptionist's smile faded slightly, and she picked up the phone. After a brief conversation, she nodded toward the hallway. "Mr. Whitman will see you now. His office is the second door on the right." John walked briskly down the hall, his jaw tight. He wasn't going to let them push him around. When he reached the door, he knocked once before pushing it open. Inside, Mr. Whitman sat behind a large wooden desk, looking completely at ease. He was an older man, dressed in a crisp suit, with neatly combed gray hair. He barely glanced up as John entered. "Ah, Mr. Davis," Whitman said, finally looking at him. "I assume this is about the security gate." John didn't bother sitting down. "That's right. I want to know why the HOA thought it was okay to put a gate on my property without my permission." Whitman leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "It's for the benefit of the entire community. We've had concerns about security, and the HOA decided it was best to install controlled access points." John shook his head. "That doesn't explain why you didn't ask for my permission. That's my land. You can't just build on it." Whitman sighed, as if John was being difficult. "We sent out notices last month. The board voted, and the decision was approved." "I never got a notice," John said sharply. "Even if I had, you still don't have the right to make changes to my property." Whitman gave him a small smile. "The HOA has the authority to make improvements to the neighborhood. It's in the agreement you signed when you bought your house." John's fists clenched. "Show me where it says you can take control of my driveway." Whitman didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder. "It's all in the community guidelines." John snatched the document and quickly scanned through it. Nowhere did it say the HOA could modify private property without permission. He looked back at Whitman. "This doesn't give you the right to put a gate on my land," John said firmly. "And I'm not handing over a key either." Whitman's expression darkened. "If you refuse to comply, there will be consequences." John's eyes narrowed. "Is that a threat?" Whitman smiled again, but this time it was colder. "It's simply a fact. The HOA enforces the rules. If you don't cooperate, you'll be fined. And if you try to remove the gate yourself, there will be further actions." John took a deep breath. He could see now that reasoning with Whitman was pointless. The HOA wasn't going to back down easily, but neither was he. "Fine," John said. "If that's how you want to play, I'll handle this my way." Without another word, he turned and walked out of the office. He had already decided what he was going to do next: change the locks and call a lawyer. John drove home, his mind racing with frustration. The HOA had crossed the line, and now they were threatening him with fines just because he refused to hand over a key to a gate they had no right to install. He knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to let them push him around. As soon as he pulled into his driveway, he stepped out of his car and examined the gate. It was tall, made of heavy metal, and had a keypad for key access. John tried opening it, but of course it was locked. He had no key because the HOA hadn't given him one. Instead, they expected him to give them a key to his own property. That wasn't going to happen. John took out his phone and searched for a local locksmith. Within minutes, he found one with good reviews and made the call. "Hey, I need to change the lock on a gate in my driveway. How soon can you come?" The locksmith responded, "I can be there in about an hour." "Perfect," John said. While waiting, he decided to check his mailbox, hoping to find the so-called notice the HOA claimed they had sent. As expected, there was nothing about a gate. No letter, no warning, just the usual junk mail and bills. That proved what he already knew: they had made this decision without telling him, and were now trying to act like it was official. An hour later, a van pulled up in front of his house. A man in a blue uniform stepped out, carrying his tools. "You the one who called about a lock change?" "Yeah, that's me," John said, leading him to the gate. The locksmith looked at it and nodded. "Shouldn't take long. You just need a new lock, right?" "Exactly. I need a lock that only I have a key to." The locksmith grinned. "I can do that." In less than 30 minutes, the old lock was gone, and a brand new one was in place. John tested it, making sure it worked smoothly. The locksmith handed him 2 keys. "This lock is high security. No one's getting through without your permission." John smiled for the first time that day. "That's exactly what I wanted. Thanks." After paying the locksmith, John stood by the gate, feeling a sense of victory. The HOA thought they could control this property, but he had just taken back his power. He locked the gate and pocketed the key. Now, if the HOA wanted access, they were out of luck. That night, as John sat in his living room, his phone buzzed. He checked the screen, several missed calls from the HOA office. Then, a voicemail. He pressed play. "Mr. Davis, this is Mr. Whitman. We've been informed that you changed the lock on the gate. This is unacceptable. You need to provide us with a key immediately, or there will be serious consequences." John shook his head, letting out a short laugh. "Yeah, we'll see about that." He wasn't backing down. First, he had changed the locks. Now, it was time for the next step, calling a lawyer. John knew the HOA wasn't going to let this go easily. After listening to Whitman's voicemail, he realized they were trying to intimidate him. But he wasn't scared. If they thought he would just hand over a key because of their threats, they were in for a surprise. The next morning, John made an important call to his lawyer, Rebecca Hall. She specialized in property disputes and had a reputation for standing up to HOAs that overstepped their boundaries. "John, this sounds like a clear case of the HOA violating your property rights," Rebecca said after he explained everything. "They had no legal right to install that gate without your permission. And demanding a key. That's completely unacceptable." John felt a sense of relief. "So, what should I do?" "First, we're going to send them a formal legal notice," Rebecca said. "It will state that they must remove the gate immediately, or they'll face legal consequences. If they refuse, we'll take them to court for trespassing and illegal property modification." John grinned. This was exactly the kind of action he wanted to take. "That sounds perfect. Let's do it." Rebecca got to work right away. Within hours, she had drafted a strong legal letter and sent it directly to the HOA office. John could only imagine Whitman's reaction when he received it. Sure enough, that evening, John's phone rang again. It was Whitman. John let it go to voicemail. A minute later, another message appeared. "Mr. Davis, we received your lawyer's notice. This is unnecessary. The HOA was acting in the best interest of the community, and we expect your cooperation. If you continue down this path, there will be additional consequences." John chuckled. They were still trying to scare him. He decided not to respond. Instead, he sat back and waited. The next day, something interesting happened. A few of John's neighbors stopped by to talk. "Hey, John," one of them, Mike, said. "I heard about what happened with the HOA. They put a gate on your property." John nodded. "Yeah, and now they want me to give them a key." Mike shook his head. "That's crazy. They've been doing stuff like this for a while now, changing rules, making people pay fines for no reason. But nobody wants to fight them." "Well," John said, crossing his arms, "I'm fighting back." Mike looked impressed. "Good. If you need any support, let us know. A lot of people in the neighborhood are tired of how they run things." John hadn't expected that. Maybe he wasn't the only one who felt like the HOA had too much power. Later that evening, John got an email from Rebecca. "The HOA has 3 days to respond to our notice. If they don't agree to remove the gate, we'll escalate this legally. Let me know if they contact you again." John smiled. The battle had begun, and he had no intention of losing. John woke up feeling determined. The HOA had 3 days to respond to his lawyer's notice, and he was eager to see how they would react. He wasn't going to let them get away with taking control of his property. By noon, his phone buzzed with an email from Rebecca. He opened it quickly. "John," the HOA's lawyer responded. "They claim the gate is part of a community improvement project, and that you are required to comply with their decision. However, they did not provide any legal documents proving they have the right to modify your property. This is a weak argument on their part. I suggest we prepare for legal action." John smirked. So, the HOA was still trying to act like they had power over him. but they were clearly on shaky ground. He replied to Rebecca, agreeing to move forward with the next steps. That evening, as John was watering his front yard, he noticed Mr. Whitman walking toward him. Dressed in his usual expensive suit, Whitman wore a polite but forced smile. "Mr. Davis," he greeted. "Can we talk?" John put down the hose and crossed his arms. "Sure. What's this about?" Whitman sighed, glancing at the locked gate. "You really didn't have to involve a lawyer. This could have been handled within the community." John raised an eyebrow. "You mean by just letting you take control of my driveway?" Whitman smiled tightly. "The HOA is only trying to maintain order and security. You must understand, these measures benefit everyone." John shook his head. "No, what I understand is that you installed a gate on my property without permission and then demanded a key. That's not security. That's overreach." Whitman's expression darkened slightly. "The HOA has rules, Mr. Davis." "Yeah. Show me the rule that says you can build on private property without permission," John shot back. For a moment, Whitman didn't respond. Then he sighed. "Look, I don't want this to become a bigger issue than it already is. If you just provide us with a key, we can put this behind us." John smirked. "Not happening." Whitman's jaw tightened. "If you don't comply, the HOA will impose fines. And if you continue to resist, legal action may be taken against you." John chuckled. "Funny, because my lawyer is already preparing legal action against you. You're on my property right now, threatening me after trespassing to install that gate. So, if anyone should be worried, it's you." Whitman's confidence seemed to falter for the first time. He cleared his throat. "I'll discuss this with the board." John nodded. "You do that." As Whitman turned and walked away, John knew he had rattled the man. The HOA had overstepped, and now they were trying to cover their tracks. But John wasn't done. The next morning, Rebecca called with an update. "The HOA is scrambling, John. They don't have the legal backing for what they did, and they know it. We're filing an official complaint. If they don't remove the gate soon, we'll take this to court." John grinned. He had stood his ground, and now the HOA was on the defensive. Victory was getting closer. The next morning, John woke up feeling more confident than ever. The HOA was clearly struggling to defend their actions, and with Rebecca preparing a legal case, he knew he had the upper hand. As he sipped his coffee on the porch, he noticed a few of his neighbors walking by. Mike, the neighbor who had spoken to him earlier, stopped and waved. "Hey, John," Mike said. "I heard Whitman came to talk to you yesterday. What happened?" John chuckled. "He tried to convince me to hand over a key. When that didn't work, he started throwing around threats about fines and legal action." Mike shook his head. "Classic HOA move. They pressure people until they give in. But you're not backing down, huh?" "Not a chance," John said. Mike looked around and then lowered his voice. "A lot of people are watching this. The HOA has been pushing us around for years, but no one ever fights back. If you win this, it could change things for the whole neighborhood." John hadn't thought about that. He had been so focused on defending his own rights that he hadn't considered how his fight could impact others. Just then, John's phone rang. It was Rebecca. He answered quickly. "John, the HOA just sent an official response," she said. "They're claiming that you agreed to the gate as part of a community improvement project when you signed the HOA contract." John frowned. "That's a lie. There was nothing about this in the contract." "I know," Rebecca said. "I reviewed your documents, and there's no clause that allows them to build on your property without permission. They're bluffing." John smirked. "So, what's next?" "We file a formal complaint with the county property office," Rebecca said. "If the HOA refuses to remove the gate, they'll be facing serious legal trouble. And if they try to fine you, we'll counter with a lawsuit." John nodded. "Let's do it." Later that afternoon, as John was locking the gate, a black SUV pulled up in front of his house. He recognized the driver, one of the HOA board members, Mr. Langley. The man stepped out, adjusting his tie. "Mr. Davis," Langley said with a polite but strained smile. "I'd like to talk." John crossed his arms. "Go ahead." Langley sighed. "Look, we understand that you're upset. Maybe we could come to an agreement." John raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" Langley hesitated. "If you provide the HOA with a key, we'll drop any potential fines and offer a small reduction in your HOA fees." John let out a short laugh. "So you're trying to bribe me into giving you access to my property?" Langley's smile faltered. "It's not a bribe. We just want to avoid unnecessary legal trouble." John shook his head. "The only way to avoid legal trouble is for the HOA to remove the gate. That's my final offer." Langley's face darkened. "You're making a mistake." John smirked. "No, I think I'm making history." As Langley got back into his SUV and drove away, John knew he had shaken the HOA. They were scrambling, and it was only a matter of time before they gave in. The next morning, John checked his email and saw a new message from Rebecca. He opened it quickly, eager to see the latest update. "John, I've officially filed a complaint with the county property office. The HOA is in violation of property laws, and they will be forced to respond soon. If they don't remove the gate, we'll move forward with a lawsuit." John grinned. This was exactly what he wanted. The HOA had been acting as if they had all the power, but now they were being held accountable. Later that day, as John was mowing his lawn, he noticed a small group of neighbors gathering near his driveway. Mike was among them, along with a few others John didn't know very well. They looked curious and supportive. Mike walked up first. "Hey, John. Looks like things are getting serious." John nodded. "Yep. My lawyer's pushing forward with legal action. The HOA's going to have to answer for what they did." One of the other neighbors, an older woman named Mrs. Keller, shook her head. "They've been bullying homeowners for years. It's about time someone stood up to them." A man named Greg, who lived a few houses down, added, "I had a similar problem last year. They tried to fine me for painting my front door the wrong shade of blue. I fought it, but they made my life miserable." John listened carefully. He had been so focused on his own issue that he hadn't realized how many others had suffered under the HOA's strict and unfair rules. "We need to do something," Mike said. "Not just about your gate, but about the HOA itself." John thought for a moment. What if we all worked together? If enough homeowners push back, we could force some real changes. The group nodded in agreement. It was clear that John's fight had sparked something bigger. Just then, a car pulled up in front of John's house. It was Whitman. He stepped out, his expression tense as he saw the gathering of neighbors. "Mr. Davis," Whitman said, walking up the driveway. "May I have a word?" John crossed his arms. "Go ahead." Whitman cleared his throat. "The HOA board has reviewed the situation. We may be willing to remove the gate." A murmur went through the group of neighbors. Whitman hesitated before continuing. "If you agree to sign a document stating that the HOA has the right to make modifications for community safety in the future." John smirked. "So you want me to let you do this again whenever you feel like it?" Whitman's jaw tightened. "It's a fair compromise." John shook his head. "No deal. The gate comes down, period. And after what I've learned from my neighbors, we'll be looking at bigger changes in this HOA." Whitman's face turned red. He glanced at the group of homeowners, realizing that John wasn't alone in this fight anymore. "This isn't over," Whitman muttered before walking back to his car. John watched him drive away, then turned back to his neighbors. "We're just getting started," he said, and from the determined looks on their faces, they were ready to stand with him. The next morning, John woke up feeling more confident than ever. The HOA was clearly struggling to defend their actions, and with Rebecca preparing a legal case, he knew he had the upper hand. As he sipped his coffee on the porch, he noticed a few of his neighbors walking by. Mike, the neighbor who had spoken to him earlier, stopped and waved. "Hey, John," Mike said. "I heard Whitman came to talk to you yesterday. What happened?" John chuckled. "He tried to convince me to hand over a key. When that didn't work, he started throwing around threats about fines and legal action." Mike shook his head. Classic HOA move. They'd pressure people until they give in. "But you're not backing down, huh?" "Not a chance," John said. Mike looked around and then lowered his voice. "A lot of people are watching this. The HOA has been pushing us around for years, but no one ever fights back. If you win this, it could change things for the whole neighborhood." John hadn't thought about that. He had been so focused on defending his own rights that he hadn't considered how his fight could impact others. Just then, John's phone rang. It was Rebecca. He answered quickly. "John, the HOA just sent an official response," she said. "They're claiming that you agreed to the gate as part of a community improvement project when you signed the HOA contract." John frowned. "That's a lie. There was nothing about this in the contract." "I know," Rebecca said. "I reviewed your documents, and there's no clause that allows them to build on your property without permission. They're bluffing." John smirked. "So, what's next?" "We file a formal complaint with the county property office," Rebecca said. "If the HOA refuses to remove the gate, they'll be facing serious legal trouble. And if they try to fine you, we'll counter with a lawsuit." John nodded. "Let's do it." Later that afternoon, as John was locking the gate, a black SUV pulled up in front of his house. He recognized the driver, one of the HOA board members, Mr. Langley. The man stepped out, adjusting his tie. "Mr. Davis," Langley said with a polite but strained smile. "I'd like to talk." John crossed his arms. "Go ahead." Langley sighed. "Look, we understand that you're upset. Maybe we could come to an agreement." John raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" Langley hesitated. "If you provide the HOA with a key, we'll drop any potential fines and offer a small reduction in your HOA fees." John let out a short laugh. "So you're trying to bribe me into giving you access to my property?" Langley's smile faltered. "It's not a bribe. We just want to avoid unnecessary legal trouble." John shook his head. "The only way to avoid legal trouble is for the HOA to remove the gate. That's my final offer." Langley's face darkened. "You're making a mistake." John smirked. "No, I think I'm making history." As Langley got back into his SUV and drove away, John knew he had shaken the HOA. They were scrambling, and it was only a matter of time before they gave in.